You sit before me, carrying a question that is not only about others, but about yourself. Why do empaths vanish without warning? And why do they never return? To understand this mystery, we must enter not the surface world of behavior, but the subterranean kingdom of the psyche where archetypes whisper, shadows breathe, and the soul arranges its own escapes. What you call an empath is not merely a personality type or a sentimental trait. It is an ancient wound transformed into a vessel of sensitivity. The empath is born not through ease, but through fracture. Somewhere in the labyrinths of early life, the empath learned that survival depended on perceiving what was unspoken, feeling what was hidden, anticipating what was denied. This is not a gift granted by heaven alone. It is the scar that becomes luminous, the trauma that learns to listen. The empath walks into relationships carrying this heightened organ of perception. It is invisible, but it is always open, always absorbing. They do not only hear words, they feel the tremor beneath them, the hesitation in the voice, the contradiction between gesture and mask. When they give with the whole nervous system, not merely with thought. And when they stay too long in the presence of deception, exploitation, or indifference, they are consumed from within. They do not cry out immediately, for their archetype is the healer, the wounded physician, who believes that with enough patience and love, they can repair the broken temple of another soul. But the psyche has its limits. It is in dreams that the empath threshold first appears. They dream of drowning in houses where the ceilings leak, of carrying infants that never stop crying, of wandering through cities where every stranger demands a piece of their clothing. These are not random fictions of sleep. They are the images of depletion, the unconscious screaming, what the waking ego refuses to hear. At a certain point, the unconscious acts, and when it acts, it is swift, decisive, without explanation. One day, the empath is still present, listening, offering, enduring. The next day, a sudden silence falls. They leave without a word, because words would only be captured, twisted, or ignored. The departure is not a choice, but an eruption. This is why you cannot persuade them back. Once an empath psyche has torn away from a situation, it is not the conscious ego that made the decision. It is the deeper self, the archetypal center of the psyche that orchestrates individuation. The self whispers, enough. And when the self speaks, the conscious mind must follow, even if it does not understand. Return is impossible, because return would mean re-entering the same tomb that already drained their lifeblood. The archetype of resurrection does not take you back into the same grave. It leads you into a new life. Consider the myth of Persephone. She is abducted into the underworld, forced to consume its fruit, bound to its shadows. But once she emerges into the upper world, she never returns in the same form. She becomes the goddess of the cycle itself, the one who teaches that some descents must happen, but also that no return is truly a return. It is a transformation, So too, with the empath, they may appear to leave suddenly, but in truth, their soul has been descending for a long time. The departure is only the visible sign of an inner metamorphosis, already complete. What makes this departure so devastating to those who are left behind is the silence. Silence is the language of the self when the ego refuses dialogue. The empath knows that if they try to explain, their words will be met with gaslight, denial, or manipulation. They have already lived inside the endless cycle of justification and apology. Their leaving without a word is not cruelty. It is an act of psychic survival. Imagine a bird trying to describe to the cage why it must fly. The cage does not understand flight. It only understands containment. The bird does not debate, it breaks free. Now, you may ask, why never return? Because to return would be to betray the wisdom of the self. When the soul commands a departure, it is not a rehearsal, it is a final act. The empath knows unconsciously that if they were to go back, they would be consumed to death. They are not running from responsibility, they are obeying a deeper law, the law of psychic conservation. Just as the body cannot pour blood endlessly without replenishment, the psyche cannot keep bleeding energy without collapse. And collapse is not individuation, it is annihilation. Yet, I must tell you, the empath's departure is also a message to those left behind. It is a mirror suddenly snatched away. Those who depended on the empath's endless availability must face the silence of their own shadow. Many cannot bear it. They interpret the departure as betrayal, abandonment, even cruelty. But in truth, the empath's withdrawal is the only way the other can be forced to confront their parasitic patterns. In this sense, the empath becomes an unwilling teacher of boundaries. By disappearing, they reveal the hunger that was being fed, the unconscious vampirism that was never confessed. This mystery of disappearance is not only interpersonal, but collective. We live in a culture that celebrates constant availability, constant giving, constant empathie. But archetypally, no figure can remain in the role of the sacrificial lamb forever. Christ is crucified once. He does not return again and again to the cross to satisfy the insatiable demands of the unconscious crowd. The empath's sudden vanishing is a microcosmic crucifixion, a moment where they refuse to be sacrificed anymore. They step into the archetype of the wanderer, the exile, the one who carries their sensitivity into a new destiny. Let us not romanticize this process. For the empath, leaving is not triumphant. It is often lonely, confusing, and filled with guilt. They wrestle with the inner voices that call them selfish, cold, or ungrateful. They fear being misunderstood, but this suffering is part of individuation. Every soul that seeks its wholeness must confront the guilt of disobeying the collective expectation. Individuation is always betrayal in the eyes of the tribe. And yet, to remain loyal to the tribe against the command of the self is to betray the soul itself. The dreams that follow after departure confirm this. No longer do they dream of drowning or crying infants. Instead, they dream of finding hidden rooms in their house, of discovering a forest they never knew existed, of meeting figures who hand them forgotten tools. The unconscious begins to replenish them with images of possibility. Their psyche is rebalancing, restoring energy that was previously consumed. The empath is not only leaving someone else, they are returning to themselves. And you, if you have ever been left by such a soul, must ask not, why did they leave me, but what part of me demanded their sacrifice? To learn from their departure is to encounter your own shadow, the unloved child within who demanded endless care, the tyrant within who consumed love without reciprocity. If you can face this mirror, then perhaps you too can individuate. The empath's departure may be the wound that forces you to begin your own descent, your own meeting with the self. I tell you this not to condemn, but to reveal. The departure of the empath is not the end of the story, it is the beginning of another. In every archetypal drama, disappearance is not finality, it is transformation. When the empath leaves without warning and never returns, it is not because they hate, but because they are compelled by love of the self. They vanish into the night, but the silence they leave behind is not empty. It is full of meaning, waiting for you to interpret, waiting for you to grow. When we speak of the empath leaving, it is important to realize that this departure is not merely a physical act, but a psychic rupture. It is as if an invisible thread that bound them to the other has been severed by forces greater than willpower. I have often said that the psyche is not governed by the conscious ego, but by deeper structures, by what I called the collective unconscious. Within this unconscious, the empath is bound to archetypes of sacrifice and redemption. They are the ones who unconsciously enact the myth of the healer, the saint, or even the scapegoat. And yet every archetype contains its shadow. When the healer is not balanced, they become the martyr, endlessly bleeding, unable to live for themselves. This is why the leaving is sudden. The martyr does not gradually fade out. They are rescued by the unconscious through a radical act. It is the archetype reasserting balance, preventing psychic death. One day, the empath is held in chains by invisible loyalties, and the next, the chains have melted like wax under fire. To the outside world, it looks cold, cruel, even ruthless. But inside the empath, it is nothing less than salvation. They are pulled away not by choice but by destiny. You may notice that such people often vanish into solitude. They do not immediately leap into another relationship or entangle themselves in new obligations. They disappear into silence, into the hermit archetype. This solitude is necessary because it is the only place where they can hear their own voice again. For years, they have been attuned to others, like a harp resonating with every passing touch. Now, the strings must be retuned to the self. Solitude is not abandonment of humanity, it is the re-establishment of psychic boundaries. It is the alchemy of the soul in retreat. In their dreams, during this phase, empaths encounter forests, caves, oceans, vast landscapes that stretch beyond the limits of the city. These are images of the unconscious itself, the soul, having been drained by the demands of others, finds nourishment in the wilderness of its own depths. The forest provides images of rootedness. The cave offers the womb of renewal. The ocean dissolves the false identity that was built from pleasing others. The psyche provides exactly the medicine that the conscious ego could not imagine. Why do they never return? Because the archetypal current that carries them forward does not flow backwards. Individuation is not a circle that loops back into the same cage. It is a spiral that carries the soul higher. Even if it seems to revisit old themes, when an empath departs, the person they once were is already gone. Even if they stand in front of the same people, they are no longer available in the same way. Their departure is an initiation. Once initiated, the initiate cannot go back to innocence. You may wonder, is there not forgiveness? Is there not reconciliation? Yes, forgiveness is possible, but forgiveness does not mean re-entry. The empath may forgive with a whole heart, but the archetype of martyrdom has been burned away. They no longer carry the same compulsion to heal, to save, to endure. Forgiveness is inner release, not external repetition. Do not confuse the two. When the empath forgives, it is not an invitation back into the old pattern. It is a blessing from afar, a closing of karmic cycles. Think of the phoenix. It burns in flames, these, and rises anew. The ashes do not reassemble into the old bird. They are simply gone. The phoenix that emerges carries continuity, but also transformation. The empath who has left and never returned is like this. They may appear to you again, but they are not who you knew. They are another version, born from fire, no longer bound to the past. To demand that they return to what was is to demand the impossible, to ask ashes to rise again in their old form. And yet, we must look deeper. The empath does not leave only because of external exploitation. They leave because the soul demands individuation. The people they walk away from are mirrors of their own shadow, mirrors that force them to confront how they betrayed themselves. The other may have consumed, demanded, wounded, but the empath's deeper truth is that they allowed it out of unconscious patterns of guilt, fear, or duty. The self finally forces them to break away not only from the other, but from their own shadowed complicity. That is why the departure feels so final. It is not just leaving a person. It is leaving an old identity. This is the deeper mystical law. When the self intervenes, the ego is powerless. The self does not negotiate. It compels. It is the archetype of God within the psyche, the totality of who you are destined to become. When it says enough, the empath cannot stay. The departure is obedience to the inner God image. Even when the conscious mind trembles, now what is left for those who have been abandoned by an empath? Pain, confusion, perhaps Rage. But within this lies a sacred opportunity. The sudden loss confronts you with your own dependence, with your own hunger for endless giving. Perhaps you were unconsciously consuming the empath's energy because you could not feed yourself. Perhaps you mistook their sacrifice for love, and now you must face the emptiness within. If you can endure this confrontation, if you can face your shadow without denial, then the empath's departure becomes a gift. The wound becomes a doorway into your own individuation. In myth, the healer does not stay forever. Hermes appears, delivers a message, and vanishes. Christ heals, and then withdraws into solitude. The shaman visits the tribe, but always returns to the wilderness. The empath, too, is such a figure. They are not meant to remain as permanent caretakers. They are messengers of the unconscious, showing you both the possibility of love and the danger of consuming it. When they vanish, it is the archetype fulfilling its role. To cling to them forever would be to refuse the lesson. So when you ask why empaths leave without warning, understand that the warning was always there in the silence, in the exhaustion, in the dreams that they themselves did not speak. And when you ask why they never return, understand that their soul has obeyed a greater law than human comfort. They have stepped into their individuation, and they will not trade it for familiarity. The only return is symbolic. They return to themselves, not to you, and yet there is still mystery. For sometimes, in the vast unfolding of time, you may meet again, but if you do not expect the same person. Expect a soul transfigured, one who carries new symbols, who has walked through forests of solitude, who has found the hidden rooms of the psyche. The bond may not be what it was, but it may still hold meaning, a different kind of connection, no longer parasitic, but equal, no longer compulsive, but free. This is the paradox. The empath leaves without warning, never returns as before. But through their departure, they awaken both themselves and those they leave behind. The departure is an ending, yes, but also a beginning, a seed planted in the darkness, and like all seeds, it will one day sprout in unexpected ways. When an empath departs, there is often a haunting stillness that follows. It is as though the psychic field itself has shifted, leaving behind an absence that is more powerful than presence. You must understand, absence is never empty. It is filled with all the projections that once clung to the empath, now forced back upon the one who created them. The other begins to feel the hunger that was once silently fed, the need that was once disguised beneath their demands. This is why the empath's departure is so unsettling. It reveals what was hidden. We tend to believe that people leave only because of external conditions, arguments, betrayals, disappointments. But the empath leaves because of something far deeper. They leave because the unconscious, like a tide, has receded from the shore of the relationship. And when the tide withdraws, no force of will can call it back. The energy is gone. The archetype has moved on. The river has found another path. This is why words often fail in these situations. People ask for explanations, for closure, for a clear story they can hold on to. But the empath has none to give. They themselves may not fully understand why the departure was so sudden. They only know that to remain would have meant death by slow suffocation. It is not logic that carries them out the door, it is instinct, archetypal instinct, the ancient whisper of survival encoded in the unconscious. The departure of the empath is closely related to the archetype of the exile. In mythology, exile is not only punishment, but initiation. Moses flees Egypt, not because he is fully conscious of his destiny, but because an act of violence drives him out in the wilderness. He encounters the burning bush, the image of the self, the voice of destiny. So too, the empath departs into their wilderness. Their exile is not accidental, it is a prelude to revelation. But exile is painful. Do not imagine the empath as joyfully walking away free of burdens. They carry with them grief, guilt, longing. The human heart is not as swift as the self. It takes time for the conscious ego to understand what the unconscious has already decreed. Dreams in this period often show them wandering alone, carrying heavy luggage, crossing barren landscapes. These are not signs of failure, but of transformation. The psyche is cleansing, stripping away the false identity that was bound to the old attachments. It is here that the archetype of shadow becomes most active, for in solitude, the empath can no longer avoid their own darkness. In relationships, they were consumed by the shadows of others, always caring, always absorbing. But now, alone, they must face a shadow within the anger they suppressed, the desire they denied, the hunger they disowned. This confrontation is terrifying, for the empath has often built their identity on being the good one, the selfless giver. To see the rage, the selfishness, the despair lurking inside is to shatter the mask, and yet, without this shattering, there is no individuation. The shadow must be embraced, not denied. In their dreams, this appears as a monster that pursues them, a dark figure that demands attention. At first they flee, but eventually they must turn and face it. And when they do, they discover that the monster holds a key, a piece of their own power that was rejected. By integrating this, they become more whole. They are no longer merely empaths defined by wounds. They are human beings with boundaries, with strength, with desire. The empath who returns from shadow work is not the same. They are less easily manipulated, less easily drained. They have found the fire that belongs to them. Why then do they never return? Because once they have tasted this wholeness, they cannot step back into fragmentation. To return would be to betray their own growth, to amputate the very parts of themselves they have just reclaimed. Individuation always demands sacrifice, and The sacrifice here is the comfort of the old bond. The soul demands wholeness, and once glimpsed, wholeness cannot be forgotten. There is also the archetype of the wanderer. After exile and shadow confrontation, the empath often enters a period of wandering, not aimless, but seeking. They may change careers, relocate, pursue spiritual practices, or engage in creative work that was long suppressed. This wandering is the soul searching for its rightful vessel, the form in which its energy can flow without exploitation. The empath becomes less of a mirror for others and more of a flame for themselves. They are still sensitive, still attuned, but their sensitivity now serves creation rather than sacrifice. This transformation can be bewildering to those who knew them before. The person who once absorbed every wound now speaks of boundaries. The one who once endured silence now demands honesty. The one who once stayed no matter the cost now leaves without looking back to those who depended on their old role. It feels like betrayal, but it is not betrayal. It is rebirth. The empath has stepped into a new archetype, one closer to the self. And here lies the most mystical truth. The empath's departure is not only about personal healing, it is also about collective balance. The culture demands endless empathy, endless giving, endless sacrifice, and it worships those who comply, but this worship is false, for it feeds on exploitation. When the empath refuses, when they leave, they embody a collective correction. They show that empathy without boundaries becomes self-destruction. Their vanishing is a protest from the unconscious against a culture that devours the sensitive. If you are the empath who has left, know that your departure is sacred. It is not abandonment, it is initiation. You have walked into exile so that you may find the self. You have faced the shadow so that you may become whole. You have wandered so that you may return to yourself. And if you never return to the old place, it is because the soul does not recycle old prisons. It seeks new horizons. And if you are the one left behind, know that this absence is also sacred. It forces you to confront your own hunger, your own shadow, your own dependence. It is a mirror of what you could not see before. Do not chase the empaths into their exile. They are not yours to hold. Instead, turn inward. Ask yourself, why was I so dependent on their endless giving? What part of me could not stand on its own? What shadow have I denied that fed on their sensitivity? In answering these questions, you begin your own individuation. So you see, this mystery of departure and non-return is not merely about people and relationships. It is about the great dance of archetypes, the eternal rhythm of sacrifice and individuation, exile and transformation, shadow and self. The empath leaves because the soul commands it. They never return because the soul does not go backwards. They disappear without warning because the unconscious does not explain itself, it simply acts. But within this act lies meaning for those who leave. It is the path to wholeness. For those who are left, it is the summons to confront themselves, and for the collective, it is a reminder that empathy must be balanced with strength, that giving must be paired with boundaries, that sacrifice cannot be endless. The empath who departs becomes a silent prophet of these truths. They vanish into the night, but their absence speaks louder than any presence. There is a moment in every myth when the hero passes a threshold and cannot turn back. The empath's departure is such a threshold. Once they have crossed into exile, faced the shadow, and tasted their own wholeness, the old world dissolves behind them like a dream upon waking. This is not cruelty, nor indifference, but the natural law of the psyche. The self does not allow regressions into prisons already abandoned. Individuation moves forward, always forward, like a river that refuses to flow uphill. You may still wonder why the empath does not at least return to explain